Good morning, and good morning to those of you who are watching online. This morning, we're continuing our series in Isaiah, which is in the Old Testament. We've just read from Isaiah chapter 53. And if you've been round church for a while, or you've been a Christian for a while, then Isaiah 53 is probably one of a handful of chapters in Isaiah that you've come across before in some shape or form. Maybe there were some of the words that we read there that you think, that's where it comes from. It comes from Isaiah 53. If you were here last week, you will remember this slide, which kind of just places Isaiah in his specific historical context. He was a prophet who lived around about 700 years before Jesus was born, and about 100 years before the exile. And we've said in our series that the first part of the book, chapters 1 to 39, consists largely of warnings to the people, telling the people that if you carry on living in rebellion to God, then the punishment that God has talked about will happen. You will be taken out of the land. You will be taken into exile. And then in chapter 40, there is a shift in focus, a shift in emphasis. It's almost as if chapters 40 to 66 were kind of written with the people in exile in mind, as though Isaiah is now speaking to those who have, not in his day, but those who have gone into exile, those people that have seen their homes destroyed, those people that have seen their family members killed, those people who have been taken prisoner from Judah and are now in Babylon. So these were the chapters kind of 40 to 66 that would have been an encouragement to somebody like Daniel. So Daniel and the lion's den, that Daniel. He'd have read these chapters from Babylon, and they'd have given him hope that yes, we're in exile, yes, we're in Babylon, but this is not forever. And Daniel would have also read Jeremiah, and we know Daniel read Jeremiah because Jeremiah was how Daniel learned that the exile was only going to last for 70 years, but that's a whole different story. And part of the hope that these chapters would give people like Daniel was that God is going to send an anointed one. He's going to send the Messiah, someone special who is going to come and rescue the people. And last week we were looking at Isaiah 61, and we saw from Isaiah 61 that Jesus took, or we saw last week that Jesus takes the words from Isaiah 61 talking about this person that's going to come, and Jesus applies them to himself in Luke chapter 4. But Isaiah also introduces us to another character, a character called the servant. And sometimes when Isaiah uses the word servant, it's in context of a specific person. So he'll have God say things like, my servant David, or even my servant Israel. But there are a few times in the book where it's not immediately clear who Isaiah is talking about. And it seems as if Isaiah is talking about someone who is going to come in the future. And Isaiah 53 is probably the best known of those passages. Next week, Mandy is going to be sharing with us on the subject of portraits of Jesus, because there are lots of places in the book of Isaiah where Isaiah is painting a portrait of Jesus who is to come, painting this picture 700 years before Jesus was born. Now, it's good to have some of the young people with us this morning. And when we're upstairs with the young people, one thing that we never do is expect them to sit still and listen for the whole time. And so because the young people are here, you're going to do some group work. All of you, not just the young people. Again, if you've been around church for a while, or you've been a Christian for a while, then as we were reading through Isaiah 53, you may have thought that there are some of the things in here that remind me a little bit about the Easter story, specifically the Good Friday story. And so what we are going to do is we are going to get into smaller groups. I have enough resources for 8 groups in total, I think. And what I want you to do is to have a Bible in front of you, either on your phone or a real paper version. There are some more at the back if you don't have one. And to have open within the group some, I'll leave this slide on the screen, some one of, or maybe more, depending on how many are in the group, a number of these passages open, which are the Good Friday passages. So Matthew 27, 11 to 61, Mark 15, 1 to 47, Luke 23, 1 to 56, John 18, 28 to 42. And what I want you to do is to read through as a group, read through that story, one of those stories, just pick one of the crucifixion, and then somebody in the group who's got a copy of Isaiah 53 on a piece of paper just like this. And if you don't have a pen or a pencil amongst the whole group, don't worry, I have pencils as well, to go through and just highlight where in Isaiah 53 Isaiah is making direct links to the story of Good Friday and the crucifixion. So if you can just turn your chairs around, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do this. As I say, I've got enough resources for about 8 groups. If the young people, I think you're all kind of over here anyway. So the young people are all together anyway. So get into groups, at least 3 on each side, if not 4 on each side. If this really isn't your cup of tea, just get in a group and be quiet. But you have to get in a group. I'm not going to let you sit there doing nothing. And if we had a lot more time, what I would do at this point is kind of go through the different groups, see which of those 4 gospel stories you were looking at, and see what you pulled out. But we don't have time to do that now. But hopefully, you've had, even though you've not had very long, hopefully, and you've only looked at one of the gospel passages, hopefully you've had long enough to conclude that Isaiah has done a pretty good job of describing what was going to happen to Jesus, even though he was writing 700 years before Jesus. And maybe I haven't written the home group questions for this week, but maybe we'll pick up on looking at some of those passages, or maybe in the week you just want to kind of have a look at, have Isaiah 53 open and go through each of those 4 gospel stories and just kind of go through and see all of the places where Isaiah is pointing out what is going to happen to Jesus. Certainly for the writers of the New Testament, they were, in their minds, they were very clear that Isaiah 53 was talking about Jesus. Just a few examples just to highlight that. So here in Matthew 8, verse 17. So this is in the context of Jesus has just healed Peter's mother-in-law, and Matthew says this has happened to fulfill one of these verses in Isaiah 53. Again, in Luke 22, this time, Jesus quotes something from Isaiah 53, and he says that this must be fulfilled in me. So Jesus is drawing that link between Isaiah 53 and himself. Another example, this time from the book of Acts. Some of you will know this story where Philip is running in the desert. He's running from Jerusalem to Gaza. And he comes across an Ethiopian riding in a chariot, and this Ethiopian is reading from Isaiah 53. And he's looking at the bit that we know as verses 7 and 8. And he says to Philip, is Isaiah writing about himself, or is he writing about someone else? And Philip is able to show him how, from starting with Isaiah 53, but then going elsewhere in the Old Testament, how that these verses are talking about Jesus, and Philip is able to share the good news of Jesus with this Ethiopian. And for many people who've been reading Isaiah for the last, well, over 2,500 years, they've encountered Isaiah talking about the Messiah, and they've encountered Isaiah talking about the servants, and many people have concluded that Isaiah is talking about two different people. There is the Messiah, and there is the servants. Now, I don't know how theologically minded Peter the fisherman was when he first encountered Jesus. I don't know how much time Peter spent thinking about what Isaiah had written so many years before. And I expect this split between the Messiah and the servant was one of the reasons, amongst other reasons, one of the reasons why the disciples failed to grasp that Jesus had to die. They accepted that Jesus was the Messiah, but they failed to understand that he was also the suffering servant. And yet Jesus identifies himself as both. Yes, he is the Messiah, but he's also the one who is going to suffer and die. But Isaiah wants us to be clear in our minds that this suffering, this death, was not something that happened by accident. This was all a part of God's plan. And Isaiah wants us to know why Jesus had to suffer and die. Verse 5, he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Another example, verse 12, for he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. I was very conscious as I was been looking at Isaiah 53 this week, mainly using the New International Version, but also using the English Standard Version, that Isaiah uses some quite long words. He talks about transgressors. He talks about iniquities. And these may be words that you're not familiar with, particularly if English is not your first language. The Good News translation uses smaller words. It talks about sin, it talks about evil, and it talks about wrongdoing, which, interestingly, is also the language that the New Testament picks up when it's translating these words. So you might want to go away and look at this Bible Gateway on your phone and have a look at it in the New Good News version. It's slightly shorter words. Now, one of the problems with the internet is that you will be able to find anyone who will say anything about any topic. The challenge comes in knowing whether what they're saying is actually true or not. One of the things that you will discover on the internet is a claim that Isaiah chapter 53 is a passage that Jews are forbidden from reading, because it's a passage that, as we've looked, it so clearly points to Jesus. And so there's this claim that Isaiah 53 is a forbidden passage. But then there is the counterclaim that no such ban exists, that no one is forbidden from reading any parts of the Hebrew Bible. There is no rule that says you must not read Isaiah chapter 53. And that there's this claim that this is a line that's used by missionaries to the Jewish people. They'll say, you're banned from reading Isaiah 53 with the intention of people going to read Isaiah 53. What is this banned passage? And then reading this description so clearly about what how Jesus suffered. But as I say, there is a counterclaim that this ban is not. There is no ban. In terms of this chapter, they'll say, well, it's talking about the suffering of the Jewish people. It's not talking about Jesus. It's talking about how the Jewish people are going to suffer throughout history. Now, I am not in a position to know which of these two particular views is the right one. I expect the truth is somewhere in between. But what is true, because I've done a little bit more research this week, is that if you look through the weekly readings that occur in the synagogue over a 3-year cycle, like they have in the Anglican Church, then Isaiah 53 never crops up. Now, other sections of the prophets and other sections of Isaiah also don't crop up, so how much we can read into that, I don't know. but certainly Isaiah 53, the verses that we've read, will not be read as part of a weekly synagogue service. Now, as I've been reading Isaiah 53, I wonder what Isaiah thought as he wrote these words. You know, not only was he writing 700 years before Jesus, it was still 100 years out from the exile. The people were still being warned about their rebellion against God. And there was going to be another 100 years of rebellion until God sends the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar to take them out of the land and destroy Jerusalem. But already, even though we're still 100 years of rebellion away from the exile and then another 600 odd years to Jesus, already the cross is a part of God's plan, as it has been, well, I was going to say since Genesis 3:15, but since before then, because God knows that we can't do this on our own. The consistent message of the Old Testament story so far, as we've read through from Genesis, is that when human beings are confronted with the test, are you going to trust God and do things His way? Or are you going to take matters into your own hands? All too often, we choose to do it our way rather than to trust God. And yet already, Isaiah is looking ahead to Jesus. Jesus, who is going to take the punishment for our rebellion. He's going to take our punishment on himself, that we might know peace with God, that we might know forgiveness for sins. So, what? I haven't asked that question for a while, so I thought I would dig out this old slide and use it again. So what? Well, I'd encourage us and invite us this week to spend a little bit of time in Isaiah 53. As I say, maybe using something like Bible Gateway to look at it in a different version as opposed to maybe the NIV or the ESV, but maybe use the Good News version if language is a barrier. But read through Isaiah 53. Spend some time reflecting on Isaiah 53. Think about, this is what Jesus went through for me. This is the punishment that he took so that I might go free. This is what he went through so that my sin might be forgiven, so that I might know peace with God. Read Isaiah 53. And in the words of Charles Wesley, who I don't quote very often, but in the words, as we read Isaiah 53, may we be lost in wonder, love, and praise. Let's pray.